Hello, my name is Nancy. I am the Normal Intuitive, and this is episode 15. Thanks so much for joining me. If you're listening to me for the first time, a quick background on who I am and why I'm called the Normal Intuitive. I am a 30-something stay-at-home mom of 2 living children. I have 1 in spirit. I've been married for over 11 years to my spouse who is in active duty, and we live in New England. We have 2 cats, 2 dogs, and it's essentially a circus at my house. I call myself, the Normal Intuitive because despite being a psychic medium from the outside, you would never guess that I have these abilities. I live a very, normal, quote unquote, life with having kids and dogs and cats and a husband and all that entails. You can reach me, you can book me for readings on my website at one-question.net. You can also touch base with me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/1question@a time. That's 1 spelled out. Or on my Instagram account at the number 1 question at a time. And I'm going to get right in. Usually I first give you a momism of something crazy that's happened. And I definitely could because my daughter was sick yesterday. But I'm actually going to jump right in because something just happened and I want to respond in a positive and productive way. And probably in retrospect, this is not going to be the most beneficial thing that I could do business-wise. But thank goodness I'm not in this for the money. I am in this to help people so I can just follow my heart and say what I feel and what I mean. And I have promised everyone from the very beginning of starting this website and starting this journey of coming out publicly as a psychic medium that I was always going to be truthful with everyone and I was going to allow myself to be vulnerable with this experience. And today is no exception. One of my good friends who I have read as a client as well, she was going to schedule a group reading, which I love doing. I love getting together with a bunch of women or men, if the case may be. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm hoping so. To do a reading. We do like 15, 20-minute readings, and it's a way of kind of doing kind of a mini reading, I would call it, where you kind of dip your toes into what it's like to have a psychic medium reading. You kind of get to connect with me. You get to see how I read and what it's like. And then if you want, you can always book me later. But anyway, I love group readings. They're always a lot of fun. I always meet the most wonderful people. And so we were going to schedule it for this month. And so I touched base with her this morning to ask her what the schedule is like as I'm trying to, as school's getting out, things are getting busy, trying to fit, where things are going to be scheduled. And she told me that she had talked to her women's group that she's a part of. And the overall consensus was that they did not want to have me for religious reasons. And I love my friend dearly, and I know that this wasn't my friend's feeling, but it was the overall consensus of the group that she's a part of. And, generally I kind of push that away and go, okay, I respect people's opinions and, but this kind of took me aback because it's interesting how mainstream Christianity and there's other religions, believe me, that are really against psychics and stuff that really are so against psychics, and that word psychic is such a negative word. And I know even when I was born again, I became born again at the age of 17, so I probably have a second belly button somewhere. And when I was born again for a year or so, and I followed down that path, I know that it was ingrained in me that psychics are of the devil. So and that I could go on another tangent about that on that part of my life. But it really took me back because my intention is never, ever for evil. And I actually am deeply spiritual, and I do consider myself a Christian. I do believe in Jesus. I also do believe in Buddha and Muhammad, and I do believe that there were other people that came here to send messages and to give messages of love. But I do follow the general teachings of Christ, but I am open and loving and accepting of other religions and beliefs. My husband happens to be Buddhist, and we happen to go to a Unitarian Universalist church, which if you haven't heard of, this is my plug for them. A Unitarian Universalist church is great because you can go with all different beliefs and you can have your beliefs respected, but it's really kind of a roadmap for how to live your life and how to be a good person. And there's no dogma. It's basically, do your best, love others, give what you can, and be kind. And that's kind of the overall consensus of Unitarian Universalism. I believe it's like unitarianuniversalism.org. And what's really amazing, really quickly, about Unitarian Universalism is the founders of our country actually were Unitarians. So there was two different sects, Unitarian and Universalist. And Unitarians, if you go up to Boston on the Freedom Trail, which I'm sure you've done, if you're in New England, we've all done the Freedom Trail. So there's the first ever Unitarian church up there. And we're talking the founders of our country, the leaders of the Boston Tea Party, the leaders of the initial resistance were Unitarians. And that's super inspiring to know that our country really is founded on the values of being good to others and being good to our environment and being loving and giving back and really accepting of one another. And that being said, what I got from this message from my dear friend was that these people, the majority of them, were not accepting of a psychic medium. I grew up Catholic. I grew up in the Catholic Church for the first 12 years of my life, and I then turned over into mainstream Christianity and then was a born again and kind of floundered my way. And I have always had these abilities. I was born with the abilities of sensing people that had passed over. I still do, I haven't had it in a long time, the gift of scent. And I know there's a technical name for it, but I don't use technical names, where I could actually smell people that had passed over. And I recall my grandmother passing when I was 6, and I could smell a perfume she wore, and I was alone and I could smell it. And immediately I wasn't filled with fear or anything. I just knew that she was here, and I just said hello. And it was comforting. And and that's kind of how my ability started, is I started with that gift of scent, but I also would hear people coming through my consciousness, and it wasn't my words, it wasn't my thoughts, which led to a whole other bag of worms in my teenage years, because everyone thought I was crazy, and I was put on lots of psychotropic drugs because of it. But I didn't, in this life, like in my conscious memory, I didn't ask to be psychic medium. And I've always had this ability, and I have kept it hidden very much so for my, late 30s life. And especially with my husband being military and kind of on the outside having a very traditional life, a very hetero, and here we are moving all over the place. It's not something that I ever considered coming out as, because I was trying to fit into a mold that of whatever people wanted me to be or what was expected of me. And for a long time, or for the past 10 years, it was being a military spouse and living that role. And if your parents were in the military, or you are married to a military person, you know how that goes, is that you kind of fill into that role of, supporting on the home front, so to speak. And it's also a very white thing to do, I think, too. Like it's kind of a cultural thing that I grew up in middle class white, that's what you fulfill that role. But regardless, I was always very ashamed of these abilities, and yet they would come out unexpectedly when I was with close friends and when I was in a safe environment. When I was dating my husband, I was telling him stories of him growing up, and his grandfather definitely kept coming through me, and he still to this day loves talking to his family through me, and I get joy of that now. But when we were dating, my husband's grandfather came through, and my husband was just like, what is going on? Now, my husband is although he's Buddhist now, when we first met, he was very straight edge. He still is very straight edge. He's an engineer. So to have this girl that he really thought was the one start talking about his grandfather was quite bewildering. I am not speaking correctly. I'm sorry, bewildering to him. And I did it with close friends as well. When they needed assistance, I would just come out and they would, how do you know this? I don't know. I just know it. And I would feel people around and I would let people know, okay, I feel so-and-so around. But I never made a big deal out of it. And I really was just so afraid of that rejection, that very much rejection that I received this morning of, you're evil. You are a Satanist. You are going to hell. You are you cannot speak like this, and on and on and on. I mean, this dogma that is present, and I'm going to say Christianity because I'm not familiar with the dogma with Muslim or Hinduism or any of the other religions, so forgive me for quoting from that, but I'm sure there's dogma in every, major religion, every religion, there's dogma. But, that's really what I was afraid of, was just, and I think you can all relate to this because there's some part of you, I guarantee it, that you're not sharing with the world. Maybe you love to dance, but you dance like Elaine from Seinfeld. Maybe you love to play baseball, but you can't catch a ball. Maybe maybe you're brilliant at numbers and you love to code and you don't want to be seen as this uber geek. Whatever it is, I guarantee that there's some part of you that you don't feel comfortable sharing with the world because you're afraid of that rejection. I think it's human nature that we want to be accepted. It's part of our instincts that we want to be accepted as a member of the tribe. Going back historically, so a quick disclosure. So in college, I was actually political science and women's studies. And going back through history, you will find that in every major religion, every part of history, you had shamans. You had people that knew things. They didn't have the label as psychic or psychic medium or intuitive, but they were there. If you look to the Native Americans, there was a special member of the tribe, and I believe it was a woman, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that was the medicine woman that knew things, I believe. But I know as a Native American, they honored that person that was able to connect spiritually. If you go to Hawaii, in the Hawaiian beliefs, in the old Hawaiian beliefs before Christianity took over, they believed that their ancestors actually turned into sharks and they turned into the water. And there were also people there that believed that held that honor. And actually, if you watch the Disney film on oh my God, the one that just came out with Hawaiian and you know what I'm talking about. Oh my God, and it just escapes me, but I know the words. The Hawaiian Disney film that came out a couple years ago, it's based off of people like that knew things, that could speak to our ancestors. If you go through every block of history, there were people that knew things. Now, this is where it gets ugly and dirty, is that the Catholic Church, this goes into healers. And women who were originally the healers were quietly kind of pushed out because that was, the men didn't like that. The majority didn't like that. And that's actually when hell was created. You can actually look back into history books and see a time when hell was created. And it was created because people weren't going to church. They weren't going to service. And the clergy needed to find a way of getting tithing, of getting money and building up these churches. And so by creating a hell, they were able to get money for their church. And then by making women witches and evil and the devil, then that's a twofold for them, because now it's a very patriarchal structure. And now the information that certain people have always had was silenced. Now, in the modern age, you still see that in mainstream religion, where you don't really hear a lot about shamans. But if you look, even in the, the real Christianity, you hear of people speaking in tongues. People that speak in tongues are psychics. And now this is all my point of view. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flack for this podcast episode. And please, I understand these are all my opinions and I have facts and figures wrong. I have not been in college in God knows how many years. So forgive me if some of these things are wrong. But overall, what I'm saying is that psychics, psychic mediums, intuitives have been around throughout history. They've traditionally been women. And it's only been in the last, hundreds of years that those women and these women and these intuitives have become evil and they've become the devil. And it's because that people are afraid of what they can't understand. They don't understand. And people are afraid of people that have this information because they think that we can use it against them or we have secret powers